A long time ago, a few people concentrated wealth, income, and power into their own hands. A few people ruled over territories. Success attracted competition. The concentration of wealth, income, and power into the hands of the few people made the competition to rule homicidal, genocidal, and suicidal at times. For that reason, the few people became a few paranoid, oppressive, violent people. The few paranoid, oppressive, violent people have special needs and aspirations. Their special needs and aspirations are achieve and maintain authority, power, order, and control over people who live within domestic territories. So what do? The few paranoid, oppressive, violent people gain influence over religious authority figures. Religious authority figures gain influence over communities of faithful believers. And they all conspire together to invent a manual for the enslavement of communities of faithful believers to the will of the few paranoid, oppressive, violent people. And this manual for the enslavement of communities of faithful believers to the will of the few paranoid, oppressive, violent people is regarded as a set of sacred scrolls. Sacred scrolls, exclusive divine revelations of spiritual knowledge about the word, will, way, and laws of a good entity who, according to their pessimistic myths, rules in heaven. Their pessimistic myths include a good entity rules in heaven, the good entity is at war with an evil entity, the evil entity rules over the earth. What do they mean by that? Well, for one thing, this is a projection of a truth about our set of living arrangements. The truth is a primal conflict between predator and prey exists. So this truth about our set of living arrangements, the truth is a primal conflict between predator and prey exists. People gather truths about their set of living arrangements, project those truths into their imaginations, and they make a myth out of that. And the myth is a good entity who rules in heaven is at war with an evil entity who rules over the earth. So a spiritual conflict between good and evil is a projection of a primal conflict between predator and prey. The spiritual conflict divides the spiritual realm, according to practitioners of discovery religions, and a primal conflict between predator and prey divides the material plane, the body-consuming biosphere. Now, as I said, the few paranoid, oppressive, violent people have special needs and aspirations. Their special needs and aspirations are achieve and maintain authority, power, order, and control. So they gain influence over religious authority figures, and religious authority figures say what? They say, the few paranoid, oppressive, violent people are divinely ordained to rule over domestic territories. The few paranoid, oppressive, violent people are representatives of the good entity here on planet Earth. The will of the few paranoid, oppressive, violent people is, in fact, the will of the good entity. They continue by saying, the outsiders are not divinely ordained to rule over foreign territories. The outsiders are representatives of the evil entity here on planet Earth. And the will of the outsiders is, in fact, the will of the evil entity. And then they go on to say to communities of faithful believers, what do they tell them? They tell them a supernatural system of divine eternal reward divine eternal reward and abominable infernal punishment exists. A supernatural system of divine eternal reward and abominable infernal punishment exists. Right? And this system compels the faithful observe and obey the will of the good entity. The faithful disregard and disobey the will of the evil entity. And since the few paranoid, oppressive, violent people largely determine what is the will of the good entity, they basically manage to enslave communities of faithful believers to their own will. And that's why communities of faithful believers are slaves. Their manual for the enslavement of their sacred scrolls is a manual for the enslavement of communities of faithful believers to the will of a good entity, who is represented by the few paranoid, oppressive, violent people who concentrate wealth, income, and power into their own hands and rule over domestic territories. Their religious authority figures are slave drivers who, given the proper motivation, will not hesitate to order their communities of faithful believers to march off to their own deaths in war on behalf of the few paranoid, oppressive, violent people who concentrate wealth, income, and power in their own hands and rule over domestic territories. And the few paranoid, oppressive, violent people are slave masters. They're slave masters. So this is a slave religion. And people who practice this slave religion have a slave's mentality. What's a slave's mentality? What's a slave mindset? Slaves are in search of a master. The slave mindset is the mindset of a slave in search of a master, the mindset of a collaborator in search of a tyrant.